Hey, Sam.
How's it going?
All right. I'm going to make you a co-host here. Hi, Jessica.
Hello.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We're going to wait just a minute for folks to log in. I like the Northern Lights, Jessica.
Yeah, I like them.
I was in a classroom the other day, and that's one of the students was talking about. That was something he wanted to make sure that he saw someday in person. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We're going to wait just another minute or two and let people get logged in. You know if the text went out, Sam?
Yeah, it went out at 5.
Okay. Yep.
I do know there's a lot going on as we head toward the end of the school year.
Mhm.
My wife's trying to log on. It says that she got an error.
Getting a few more people in. Okay, I think we should go ahead and get started. Thank you very much for joining us this evening. We wanted to take this opportunity to share an update on our budget and on our bond program. And I'm going to introduce the other folks on our panel today. I'm going to start with Jessica Serna Castaneda. She's our school community coordinator for Rand Sporting Middle School. And Jessica, can you do this welcome in Spanish?
Buenas tardes a todos, gracias por estar aquí. En un momento la interpretación se va a prender. Si ustedes ocupan la interpretación de esta junta al español, pueden presionar el globo y escoger Spanish y allá nos vemos.
Thank you, Jessica. And I also want to introduce Sam Rollins, our Chief of Communications.
Everyone, thanks for joining us. We know that in general, there's a very complicated set of things that feed into our budget. And so we wanted to make sure that we were being as transparent as possible and offering that transparency. So thanks for joining us. And I think there might have been an issue in the link in the text doing a redirect that we didn't expect. So I just got a text letting me know that someone had trouble getting on. So I hope that's not too widespread.
I hope that, yeah, I hope it's been okay. It will be recorded, so we will make sure that we share out the recording with everyone as well. And thank you for joining us this evening. I'm going to go ahead and get started. And I'm going to start by sharing a little bit about our district budget. And then Sam's going to talk about our bond programming, and we'll take answers at the end, or questions and questions and hopefully provide answers for you at the end. Let's see. So again, we're going to start tonight by talking about our district budget. We'll talk about the COVID resources that have come to us from the state and federal government and how we're using them. We'll talk about local resources that are so important to our school, and Sam's going to talk about our bond program. How are our schools funded? This circle here represents our budget for the 21-22 school year, and it is about $111 million. It's important to note that this is a lot more money than we normally have, and it reflects the one-time COVID resources that have been provided to school districts, and we're grateful to have them. I'm going to pause with each slide to show the Spanish one after as well. The majority of our budget is actually our staffing. We are a service organization, and therefore the bulk of our dollars go into both teaching staff, support staff, and their health and welfare benefits. A portion also goes to books and supplies and services, things like our PG&E bill, our AT&T bill, water, garbage, all those things that you pay for as well, insurance. The books and supplies dollars also reflect discretionary money that each school site and department has to work with. And that school site may decide to spend more on staffing, they may decide to spend more on services or professional learning. So those monies might get pushed into one or those other categories over the course of the year. Our budget is also variable. We have a projection from the state that we're generally given at the end of June or July prior to the school year. And we build our budget with what they say we're going to receive. Often we don't get exactly what they say we will receive. Sometimes in the middle of the year, they'll make cuts or they'll allocate things differently. This particular budget that we're looking at right now represents our first interim budget, which was presented to our school board in December. We recently presented a second interim budget, and it is already different, but this is a good reflection of our working budget. Our budget is made of a mix of federal, state, and local funding. State funding is the largest percentage. Federal and state funding covers our basics, our classroom teachers, our support staff, books and supplies. Our federal and state funds don't cover everything. Our counselors are only partially covered. Elementary art and music is not covered by federal and state funds. Our libraries, our after-school programming, those things aren't funded that way. Neither are our facilities improvements and modernizations. Those are all left to local decisions by each local community. In March of 2020, our community passed Measures T&U, and they fund our counseling programs, our art and music programs in elementary. Our career technical education programs are largely funded through these local measures. Our librarians are entirely funded through these local measures, as are our after-school programs like athletics. Our facilities modernization, our new facilities are all funded through bonds, which are also locally funded. by the votes of our local community. And Sam will speak more to this at the end of this presentation. But our yearly budget, only 3% of it is set aside for routine maintenance. It's not enough to do the kind of modernization required on buildings that are more than 50, more than 100 years old. Most of our budget, again, is state funding. Our state funding comes in different parts. The biggest part is our local control funding formula base funding. That's 64% of our budget, about $71 million. That comes to us in two ways. We're 2 districts under one board in administration. There are 3 districts like us in the state of California. But there are no districts like us that have 2 different funding formulas. So some districts are funded based on attendance, and our secondary district is funded based on attendance. But our elementary district is considered basic aid, and we are funded based on the property tax of our local property taxes. The other element of state funding is our local control funding formula, supplemental funding. This is funding that is targeting students who are English learners, low income, homeless, or foster youth. It's a little over $4 million. Each year in the fall, we send families and we send our staff and we send our 4th through 12th grade students a survey to get your feedback on what needs are. And based on that survey, we use that information to build our budgets. And both the LCFF base and supplemental are impacted by that feedback that those surveys provide us. There's another component of state funding. And that component of state funding is restricted. And these are the things that make up the restricted dollars. A lot of it's our retirement accounts. A section of that is our COVID resources, which will be spent between now and 2024. Lottery money. Lots of people will ask me, don't you get a lot of money from lottery in public schools? It's not very much, and it's restricted what it can be used for. We get some of our career technical education money from the state, a very small amount, and a small amount of our special education monies. Our federal funds are also restricted. They are about $17.5 million. The bulk of those federal dollars are COVID dollars that are one-time. The next highest amount is for students with disabilities. It is important to note that although the federal government does provide us some money to support students who have disabilities, they do not fully fund those programs. $17 million this year from our LCFF base goes to make up for the underfunding for special education programs. And every student deserves the program they need. And we believe deeply in our special education programs. And we really like to see the federal government fully fund them. But you can see here the other areas the federal funds are paying for. Our local revenue is really important to our schools, and our schools would be very different without local community support. Again, measures TNU, pay for our libraries, for our counseling programs, for art and music programs, for athletics, for other after-school supports, for our life labs. We're really fortunate to have credentialed librarians in the school district. There are a lot of districts that don't have those resources that are really that teach really important components of of education around research and how to validate sources. And we're super grateful that our community provides the support that these programs all give to our students.
Yeah, and I didn't know until recently that that our libraries do so much work in sort of teaching students about how to be safe online and how to be careful with their data, with their online presence, how to recognize bad behavior, and just sort of learn how to protect themselves on the internet.
Absolutely. It's a really important part of media literacy. Our COVID funds cover 3 years of services from 2021 through 2024. All of the surveys and thought exchanges we asked you to complete during the pandemic went into informing the plans that we have made for these resources. And if you look at it from about a 30,000-foot view, this is what it's covering: teaching staff, support staff, materials and services. Teaching staff, because we needed to reduce class size in our secondary so we could allow for social distancing in our classrooms, if that was necessary at any point. There are 24 different resources that these COVID funds are sent to us in, and they each of those resources has to have a different plan. And again, we built that plan based on community feedback and staff feedback. And they are for really specific things. There are some silver linings that came from the pandemic and the resources that became available. We have technology in homes that never had technology in them before. We have internet in homes that didn't have access before. We've been able to put money into more social emotional supports, more academic supports. We've been able to put dollars into professional learning for our teachers. We accelerated our technology plan, our 5-year plan, in 1 year's time. But you can see here all the many things that we were able to do with this money. This is another way to look at those dollars. 2/3 of the money is going to the programs listed here. We upgraded the ventilation in all of our campuses. You notice it says double RTI, elementary RTI coordinators. That's our response to intervention coordinators. They're intervention teachers that provide specific support for kids who are struggling in either English language arts or mathematics. And they have a team of instructional assistants that work with them. Credit recoveries for our high school, supporting students who may not have passed a class and need to make up a course. Had much more expansive summer school programs. And we've added social emotional counselors to all of our secondary schools.
And I like to jump in really quick here and just say that one of the things that we've been, it's, you know, we use a lot of different vectors to track the progress of students and to sort of see how well they've been doing and how much they've learned from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. And we've seen incredible signs that all of these extra supports that we've been able to have in the sort of comeback from COVID have been incredibly effective, that the rate at which students are progressing across the board pretty much at every level is just incredibly encouraging. That learning acceleration that we wanted to see at the start of the year has really come to pass, and we're really excited about what we've been able to do with all these extra COVID supports. But that also makes it all the more sad that they're expiring on a regular basis.
Yes, you can see here there are 24 different resources, and there are many resources represented in each of these bands. But in 2024, they will all sunset. One of the other silver linings of the pandemic is I'm working much more closely with my colleagues in the county, and one of the other superintendents and I meet at least once a month with Senator Laird's office. We've met with other local legislators, and we're advocating for the resources that we need to continue so many of these important programs that we really should have had prior to the pandemic. And we've seen the impact of post-pandemic. That I'm going to pass it to Sam to talk about our bond program, another locally funded program for our schools.
Thank you. Yeah, and to the attendees who have just shown up, we know that there was a problem. I don't know exactly why there was a problem. It hasn't happened in the past, but in the quick link that we put in the text, I guess it was sending people nowhere. So we just emailed everyone a new link, and so it's good to see more attendees come. But for those of you who are just joining us now, one of the main things that we wanted to do this whole presentation for was to get across an understanding of the fact that there are certain things that we are funded for essentially automatically by the state and federal government, but then there's a whole set of things that we see as vital for our students that are left up to be community decisions. Basically, the state and the federal government say, if you want these things, counselors in the elementary school, art, music in the elementary school, career technical education, and sort of job training in the secondary, so many other wonderful things, our athletic programs, we have to go and ask our community and say, we think this is important. Do you think this is important? And ask for funding that way. And one of the big things that we can only fund by going directly to the community is building and repairing everything at our school sites. And that's everything from repairing electrical grids, fixing sewage problems, getting new roofs, and building new classrooms. And so the only way that we can secure funding to do any of that stuff is through bonds. Facilities bonds are the way that we go to our community and say, can we have money to build and repair and replace? And this is really important because there's a growing body of research that draws a really direct line between the quality of the environment that a student learns in and how well they succeed and how much they achieve in their academic experience. It's true of teachers too. Teacher efficacy is really, it comes down to being in an environment that is well invested in, that's a nice place to learn. And it's one of those things that's, it sounds like common sense, but it is now being backed up by behavioral research. And this put Santa Cruz in sort of an interesting position where we went almost 20 years without going out for a bond. And a lot of this had to do with the recession. But what that means is if you go 20 years without getting any money to repair roofs, even to repaint, to fix water mains and that kind of thing, the wear and tear, having thousands and thousands of students come through every school site every year, it really adds up. And so in 2016, when we went out for a bond, it was determined that we were looking at about $300 million in needs at our facilities. We'll talk a little bit more in a second what those needs were, but yeah, going 20 years without investing in infrastructure, there's a lot of wear and tear. We were, I say we, I wasn't here at the time, but we were super gratified as a district to have so much support for the bonds that we passed in 2016. And we can't do any of this work without the support of the community. And so we were so happy to see both understanding and support from the community when we passed those bonds. It was very gratifying to see. That said, as I said, we knew we were looking for more years of work than we were getting money for repair. I said that it was determined that we were looking at about $300 million of needs across the district. And we were able to go out for just over 200 million. So we were thinking at best, we had 2/3 of the amount of what we needed, but we got straight to work. And it is worth saying that our facilities team has gone through projects more quickly than is normal at school districts. They've really done a good job of accelerating that work across the district. And hopefully everyone on the call has seen some of this great work at their school campus because it's been so distributed. My daughter goes to Galt. They got the whole roof replaced, which was pretty significant because it's an historic roof, and it's all shingled, so it's a very specific project there. A lot of beautification work at the fronts of schools, new pools, athletic fields, tons of work. It's been great to see. We've been able to, revolutionize a lot of athletic spaces, build new classrooms in so many places that were desperately needing them, improving parking and drop-off options at a lot of our sites. We built an inclusive play structure. We built a couple inclusive play structures now that can be utilized by all of our students. There's another even page of this, just sort of celebrations of the great work that has been done across the district. New science labs, new libraries. We're using a lot of portables that were essentially aging out. When you set up a portable, it has, I forget what it is, like a 20 to 30 year lifespan, generally is what they're looking at. And we had a lot that were pushing past their really useful range. And so it was great to be able to replace so many of them at Bayview, at De La Viega, at other places with permanent buildings, with actual classroom spaces that will serve for far longer than a temporary portable. But like I said, we knew that we were going in at that time with at best 2/3 of what we needed. But that was before we accounted for COVID, and COVID has been an incredibly challenging time to do any kind of repair or building work, just because every supply has been difficult. Everything costs more, labor costs more, and because everyone put off their projects for a brief period of time at the beginning of lockdown, then there's been huge competition and demand for everyone who's building anything in town. So that really complicated the work. And of course, by complicated, I just mean made more expensive. But of course, that wasn't the only thing complicating that budget and complicating that approach when we set out to do all that great bond work. If you go 20 years without breaking ground, a lot of things are going to be happening underground. There's a lot of degradation that goes on that we just didn't even know about. And we knew that we were going to be getting some surprises when we broke ground, but in some places it was really complicated, like the cost of the Harbor High Field doubled because of code changes, but also surprises that we found in the water system down there. We had a lot of things like that, where we found leaks that at times were decades old, but were so slow that they hadn't come up as problems. And also, so there was a lot of underground systems that, because they were at times like 50+ years old, no one had mapped out that system. And so when we were replacing things, say at Santa Cruz, they had to dig out all the different channels and find out where the electrical lines were and where the sewage lines and water lines were. And this is sort of my favorite story, is when you're dealing with an electrical system that's that old, you start scaring electricians. And we had people from the county who were supposed to come out and turn off the switchgear at Santa Cruz High so we could do electrical improvements. And when they saw it and saw how old it was, they all refused to turn it off, because they said, if we turn it off, it's never coming back on again. And we don't want that to be our fault. So there's a huge amount of infrastructure work that we didn't know we were looking at when we passed the last bond, which complicated things and took up more money. The kind of good news that comes out of that is now we're at a time where we really don't have any more unknowns in terms of what are we going to find in terms of the need level when we break ground, because we have spent the last 5 years really digging into all of our school sites and sort of seeing what the needs are. But it does mean that in 2024, when our bond is depleted, no school site will have more than half of its classrooms fully modernized, which had been one of the big goals that we set out with, and that we got from our community when we put the last bond together. So we've done wonderful work across the district, and we've dealt with so many pressing problems. But now we're looking at a situation where in some school sites, students in adjoining buildings will be learning effectively in different decades. So we feel very much that that work that we set out on is not done, and we want to be able to finish it. And we're sure that parents want us to be able to finish it too, because this is the learning environment that our students are in. And there's more good news. I keep kind of going good news, bad news. The good news is that we've been conducting polling in the community, and there is once again strong support for a bond, largely because I hope that it's because our community understands the need that our school is facing due to that 20-year gap without a bond. And so we're in a good position to potentially revisit the master plan, which is that sort of main list of projects that we got from our staff and from our parent community in 2016, reprioritize what work still needs to be done, and move forward on another master plan for a potential next bond. And we're at a very interesting time right now too, where if we were to pass a bond in November, we would have the ability to do two other pretty interesting things: really rapidly increase our sustainability projects across the district, which we've already been doing, but it's been a slower process than we maybe would like due to funding, and also provide a potential workforce housing development in town. And I'll talk a little bit more about the sustainability project in a minute, but first, we know, anyone who lives in Santa Cruz knows that it's an incredibly challenging time to try to live and work in this town. And for schools, that means that we're really always facing a challenge of attracting and retaining high quality teachers. And in fact, we regularly attract high quality teachers. And then after 5 years or so, they sort of hit that crisis point where they're looking for a job in a place where they can more easily live. In fact, in the last 8 years, we believe we've lost about 100 teachers due to the cost of living in Santa Cruz. And that's because when they exit, we run a survey where we sort of look at why they were leaving. And that is the most common reason for us to lose teachers, is they just can't find a way to make it work in Santa Cruz. So, we won't be able to solve the housing challenges in Santa Cruz, but we do think that we have a creative way that we could do a lot. Now, the district is in an interesting position because it owns land that can be developed on the west side behind the old Natural Bridges campus. There's nothing there right now, but we have for the past few years been looking at options of potentially building units out there that could be used to house teachers and support staff. But since we don't have money to build outright, we would have to take out a loan. We would have to pay that loan off on a regular basis, and that would essentially just make us landlords. But if we were able to invest 5% of a bond that we go out for at the outset, we would essentially get far enough ahead of our payoff schedule to be able to offer subsidized rents for teachers and staff and offer them housing below market rates in Santa Cruz to help attract and retain the great staff that we know that we need to teach the children, to teach our children. And the other cool thing that we could do is basically just really turbocharge our sustainability efforts. And we've been piece by piece around the district installing solar when we are able, replacing energy expensive equipment when we are able, replacing lighting with LED when we're able, but it's been sort of, we've been doing very good work, but it's a trickle compared to how fast we would like to do it. And again, we have a similar situation as workforce housing, where a relatively small investment from our bond funds would allow us to just really roll this out rapidly across the district, replace all of our lights with LED, replace all of our windows with, insulated double pane. And it's funny because there's not sort of this silver bullet magic way to catapult our sustainability forward. We know the ways in which we are using more energy than we want to. And so with this investment, we would be able to target all of those areas, produce more energy at every site, hopefully, than we use. Now, our first net zero campus is scheduled to be Bayview in the next couple of years. But with an investment in sustainability, we would be able to make all of our campuses district-wide net zero, we hope, in the coming years. And again, regardless of whether or not another bond passes or when that work happens, we want to make sure we take every opportunity to thank our community for the support that they've given us, right? Because we've talked about here today, there's a huge part of our budget that is not given to us by the state and federal government. And they say, ask your town and see what they're willing to invest in. And so the fact that Santa Cruz has invested in all these wonderful new classrooms and new spaces and repairs, but also in Measures T and U and in our libraries and our athletics and Life Lab gardens, we're so grateful, because we couldn't do any of this without our community support. And our schools would look a lot different without it. And so where that sort of puts us in terms of the next bond is we've already started having a series of community conversations, and we're going to do a couple rounds of this where we invite input from anyone who wants to give it within our community. That staff, families, and even neighbors are welcome to attend, so that we can reprioritize the work that is left on that master plan that we made in 2016, but also hear about anything new, any new pressing need that has arisen in the last 5 years, so that we can present a new master plan to the public and to our board to potentially get a bond on the ballot in November, and have a very specific plan that we can put out to the voters and say, this is what we want to do for our schools, and ask for support. And so I know that's a huge download of information, and we've recorded this. We're going to put it on the website. We're also looking at other ways of sort of trying to make this information as accessible as possible. But we wanted to thank you for spending the time and kind of withstanding this huge info download with us. And then also ask any questions that you have remaining from it in the chat.
So let's see, our first question is a question about the expanded learning opportunity program from the County Office of Education. Can we talk a little bit about how Santa Cruz City Schools is using that money? And will we be partnering with external partners? Currently, we are offering, we're using those dollars to pilot our own expanded learning opportunity programs at 2 campuses. We're going to be using it to support families via CKC at Westlake and De La Viega next year, but our plan in the long run is to run those programs on our school sites ourselves. And we're excited to have those dollars. If you don't know what the expanded learning opportunity program is, it's for after school care and both academic and enrichment opportunities for kids who are in TK through 5th grade after school. So we're excited to have that, and we'll also be using it as part of our summer programming this school year. There's a question about property taxes. Can the bonds be focused on property taxes on homes that are not primary residences? It's not within our purview to do that. It is only it's on every parcel in the community. It's the way the law is written. So we can't just say just secondary homes. Question about funding being tied to attendance. What percentage of SARB investigations are open per enrollees each year? Also, what metrics and analysis are done to try to recover those lost funds so that we can retain those well-trained teachers by offering a living wage? So there's 2 questions there. There's one about teacher retention and a question about SARB. So the SARB is a student attendance review board. When a student misses an excessive amount of school, they may come before a student attendance review board. And we make a plan to provide support for students to improve their attendance. It was rather an extraordinary year around attendance because of people being forced into quarantine over the course of the year. But we do really work to help support students and families when they're having challenges getting to school. And it's not just about the funding. If kids aren't in school, they're not learning. So we really want to make sure that we have the systems of support there for them. How are we analyzing what can be done to support and retain well-trained teachers? We do spend a lot of money in a teacher's early years because teachers have to clear their credentials, and we pay for coaching and we pay for continuing education for our young teachers. And it's tough because there are districts over the hill that have more revenue and therefore can pay higher salaries. There are teachers in, Carmel and Pacific Grove, it's the same thing. They have greater revenues, they can pay higher salaries. So we lose teachers to those neighboring districts, and we also lose teachers to other communities where the cost of living is less. We're really hopeful that we can put this workforce housing plan in place. I've been investigating it for the last 5 or 6 years. I've been in this role now for 8 years. And it's one of the things that I know is really important for us to ensure we have the best possible team to support our students. And there are districts that have successfully implemented workforce housing projects. Santa Clara Unified has one of the oldest programs that was started in the year 2000, and a project that was done in partnership with Intel. A lot of community colleges have a program, and we're hopeful we'll be able to make it happen. Is it expected that the massive California surplus will send any more money towards education? Yes, it is. We're talking about, so right now inflation is at about 8%, and they're talking about a cost of living adjustment. The governor's proposal in the May revise is just over 6%. And they're also talking about, in addition to that, some one-time monies. It's tough to plan with one-time monies because you can't build programs on one-time dollars. So we'll see over the course of the next several weeks as the governor and the legislature negotiate what kind of final budget we get, but we know we will benefit from some of the monies that are coming in, and we're grateful that that's the case. There's a question about how is the percentages for the restricted funds determined? Is this mandated? Yes, those restricted monies are legislated. We don't have any choice. Just like all those COVID resources that had specific uses, each of those 24 resources could only be used for certain things. And we could make plans within the parameter of those things. There's a question about special education. Do they offer field trips, and do they after school programs for students with special needs? All of our students, whether they're in general education or special education, have access to field trips and after school programs. There are other questions. There's a question about why was Natural Bridges fixed up for a private school? Actually, that private school paid for that improvements that were done to that site, and we get revenue every from them. They're renting it, so it's helped us to preserve a public piece of property. Our bond monies went to fixing the gym and the roof, but that private school did most of the improvements on that site. And we do have an agreement with Parks and Recreation. The community uses that gym and that facility as well for Parks and Recreation programs.
Well, and it's worth saying that that used to be one of the elementaries in the district, but while the population of Santa Cruz hasn't gone down, the population of parents and kids in Santa Cruz has gone down year by year as it becomes more expensive to live here. So there was a point, 25, 30 years ago where there were just a lot more kids in town. And so there was the need for more elementary schools.
And there's a question here about LCFF supplemental funding. Is that based on school or district? It's based on our entire district enrollment of students who are either low income, English learner, foster, or homeless youth. So that count for our LCFF supplemental comes from the number of students who fall into those descriptions. And there's an allocation that goes out to each school based on the number of students who they have that meet those descriptions. Is after school program free for everyone, or is it income based? It is free for students who fit those criteria of being low income, English learner, homeless, foster youth, and then it's done on a sliding scale for other families. There are other questions? The after-school program is not free at De La Vega, not this year. Next year, there will be some families that do qualify for the expanded learning opportunities program support at De La Vega. So it says, so Pajaro, for example, would get supplemental funding, but not Bayview. Actually, Bayview does get supplemental funding. Pajaro gets something called concentration grant funding, which we are not eligible for because 55% of your students or more have to fall into those student descriptions of low income, English learner, foster youth, homeless. And Pajaro Valley does qualify as a concentration district. We are not a concentration district. The annual funding per student in elementary versus secondary. Secondary districts have a higher funding rate than elementary districts. I don't have that number just off the top of my head. I'm sorry. We're 2 districts under 1 board and administration. So the dollars, unless they're categorical, unless they're for a specific thing like a grant, don't get pulled out separately. Are there any other questions? Does the Santa Cruz City Schools work with the Community Foundation to think about housing for teachers? Yes, we actually have a program with the Community Foundation. It's a partnership between a private entity called Landed and the Community Foundation. And the Community Foundation works with Landed to help teachers buy their first home. And the Community Foundation provides an investment. Landed helps teachers with their and a support staff with the down payment on a home purchase. And then the teacher or support staff just needs to pay that loan back within 30 years. So it's a way to help people get into homes, and that is a partnership with both Landed and Community Foundation. And our hope is that we can get our employees into subsidized housing for a period of time, and then they can use a program like Landed to break into the housing market here. It says Westlake is the only school that has special education. That's not true. All of our schools have special education. There are some special programs that exist on each campus. So some campuses, there's some special programs that are only on certain campuses, but every single one of our campuses have special education programs. There are other questions that we could answer. if we haven't answered a question for you tonight and you have them, please feel free to email us. We really want to help make our budget accessible. And I want to shout out to Sam and thank him for putting this together in a way that I think has been the most accessible that I've ever seen for a school budget, because it's a little bit complicated. We have a lot of different resources, and a lot of them can only be spent in certain ways. But I also want to just conclude with, we're so grateful to our community, because our schools would be very, very different without the commitment from our community to support students in our local schools. And we will make sure we get all this posted onto the website, so that encourage friends who may have questions to check it out.
Yeah, we've been delivering this information to both staff, but also the PTAs and PTOs around the district, just because we want everyone to know. And we've been calling it the traveling circus. So we've also been taking in questions. And so hopefully we'll be able to keep adding to the resources that we post online as more questions come in and stuff. So to keep it useful.
Thank you very much. It's, there's seeing some messages of thanks in the chat. Both my sons have come through the school district. I've been super grateful to be able to spend my career here, and it's a wonderful community. And lots of places through COVID, a lot of people are leaving the profession, as they're leaving all kinds of professions, but I just feel so grateful that I get to work in a place with such wonderful staff and families and students. So thank you for making it a great place. And we hope you have a good evening.